Victoria Vargas, Mezzo-Soprano, is our guest reading partner. In Opera Reading Project's upcoming reading of Florencia en el Amazonas, taking place on Friday, May 10th at 7 o'clock p.m. at the Minnesota Opera Center in Minneapolis. She has sung many operatic roles, including places like the Minnesota Opera, Opera Theater of St. Louis, Chautauqua Opera, Sarasota Opera, among others. She has extensive concert work at Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra, St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, Chautauqua Symphony, Phoenix Symphony, Minnesota Orchestra, to name just a few, and is also an educator and pedagogue. She is the assistant professor, of voice at the University of Minnesota, and is particularly dedicated to fostering equity and belonging in her teaching work, and also exploring cross-training singers in the fields of classical to contemporary commercial styles. And Victoria is also a very good friend of mine and a treasured colleague. So thank you so much for being here today. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. Welcome.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me, Laura. I should have you write my bio in the future because that makes me sound much fancier than I feel. So thank you very much for that introduction.
You're welcome. So my first question is, what is lighting you up right now in your life?
Yeah, I was thinking about that question. I would say I've been trying to get back into a routine of a daily, for lack of a better way to put it, meditative practice of practicing. For a long time, I have been practicing in a project basis way, like, I have this thing coming up in 7 weeks, so now's the time. And I've been trying to get in this habit of like every day for at least 30 minutes, I'm doing some sort of singing and vocalizing. And I've been finding it just like connects me back to myself in a very grounding way and gets my head right. And it reminds me why I'm doing all of the things that I'm doing. I think sometimes we get so far away from like, what is the point of all of this? So that's been really energizing me and making me feel like excited is practicing, basically.
Yeah, that's great. It is so important to carve out time for that. And as our lives get busier and busier, it seems as we get older, it's the being able to prioritize ourselves in addition to, like you say, kind of the essence of why we're doing what we're doing. Something to connect us to that is so crucial, I think. So as our guest reading partner, which is the first time that we've ever done something like this for Opera Reading Project, I wanted to just ask you what interests you in singing the role of Paula in Florencia en el Amazonas?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I should say that as soon as I got your email about it, I was immediately like, yes, of course, because I have been following this opera for a minute. I've had some friends who did it at HGO, Houston Grand Opera, and I just love the music. I think it's really beautiful, and it's not a soundscape that we're always hearing in the commonly performed operatic repertoire. And I felt very strongly as well, I do feel very strongly about doing pieces that represent part of the Latinx culture. So that meant something to me. And I think particularly with Paula, what I really like about that role specifically is that it doesn't really fit, in my opinion, it does not fit one specific box. I think there are moments that are character-like, the whole they're being offered iguana at the restaurant scene. And then there are these moments that are just very real and very visceral, particularly the aria. And it's nice to get into a role that has both of those offerings. I think a lot of times as a lyric mezzo, I'm often cast as like, you're going to be funny for the next 2 hours, or you're going to be a terrible, awful person for the next 2 hours in these operas. It's just very easy to get categorized in that way. So I like that there's a complexity about that particular role and her relationship to Alvaro and the way that it develops throughout the opera.
Yeah, that makes me think of, so we had Andy Acosta, who has sung the role of Arcadio in many productions. We were lucky enough to be able to engage him for a private session with our cast just this last weekend, and he over Zoom, and he spoke about the characters, this very thing that you're speaking about the dynamic character arcs and the dynamic personality shifts and drama shifts within that, and encouraged our cast to lean into those as they were, because they were also, there was an element of truth in them So
Yes.
instead of leaning in like it's a facade or something that we just had to paint because opera is dramatic in a
Yes.
stereotypical way, he encouraged that in that a very honest way, and also as a reflection of the culture of where the story comes from. Do you have any extra thoughts about that? It seems like you're kind of thinking along the same lines.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were saying that, I was thinking a lot about this one specific restaurant scene between Paula and Alvaro. They're bickering, and I think in an operatic context, it's easy to just go, "Oh, that's so funny." They're making quippy remarks. There's a lot of moments where she'll say something to him, and he won't even clock that she's talking. It's like her whole thing, right? Is you're not seeing me, and I think it's so easy to just be like, these two are some funny people doing some funny typical couple bickering, but we all have that experience where you're saying something, and whether it be a friend or a significant other, they're so caught up in their own thoughts and what they're thinking about at that moment that you're just feeling so left alone and unseen. And I just feel like, unlike a lot of operas, this particular opera does a really nice job of capturing that, again, in a more truthful, real way, and not in a caricature type of way.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like what stood out to me, well, I always study the libretto first in my process. I start with the words, and the libretto of this is so real. It's extraordinary, I think, in that way. I'm just dropped right in to the character relationships, and I love the magical realism, it's called, of the piece, and those themes that are explored in that too. I think it's so much fun and compelling, and it opens up the imagination so much. All right, I'd like to talk about a little bit about your path and how you got here to being an opera singer and an educator. And I wanted to ask you, firstly, who is the most, if there is one or a couple, influential people on your journey, and how did they impact you?
Yeah, so just a little bit of background about me. I actually originally had thought I was going to go to college as an undergraduate student to major in theater and minor in musical theater. So when I applied to colleges, I had mostly applied to acting schools and a couple of schools for singing, because I had been singing, and that was something that my choir teacher had suggested that I do. So in high school, I had a really fantastic acting teacher. Her name was Sarah Landau, and she was really very giving of her time. I don't know a lot of students who have this experience, but basically we would be prepping for whatever the show was, what we were doing. So one of my first shows I was cast in was Our Town, which, if you know anything about it, there's no actual set piece. You're miming everything in that. And she would just allow us to have these one-on-one coaching sessions, or sometimes group coaching sessions, where we would do our monologues or we would do our scene work with her. And it was just amazing the number of times, even as high schoolers, you'd think she'd maybe be a little easier on us, but we would say something and she'd stop and go, "I don't believe you." She'd put her hand up. "I don't believe you. I don't think that's true, what you just said." And so I think from an early age, that was really influential, that regardless of what the thing is that you're doing when it comes to performing, that it has to feel real. And that comes from it feeling real. I feel like this is the theme for some reason. I didn't mean it to be the theme of this interview, but that it has to feel like it's real, and it's coming from a truthful place in yourself. So I think Sarah was a really great influence as an acting teacher. I also really loved my undergraduate voice teacher. Many people have many opinions about him, but his name was Dr. Gerald Gray, and he taught at the State University of New York in Fredonia. He had a very high standard, and something he would always say, and I think it was even in his syllabus, was something like, "Great vocalists are commonplace, but artists are truly rare." And so from an early age in undergraduate, he was very much like how you show up in terms of your preparation and your professionalism and your musicianship. He was really big on being musical, because the voice, as many of us know, that's just going to take time. And the musical skills are the thing you can be honing in on at all phases of your life. So I would say he was really the person who sort of set the groundwork for me on what I should be expecting to some degree from the industry, but more importantly from myself. What is the bar I should be aiming for in my own work? So yeah, I would say those two people were probably the most influential in helping me solidify what my own standard is for music making.
What stands out to me in those two, and also because I know you and I know your work and I know your teaching is, and we've talked a lot about this, is the element of honesty and directness. And it seems like that's because that's kind of how you describe them, is that because part of the question was how do they impact you? Would you say that that also has impacted? So you had mentioned that they helped you set a standard, but also I think you're a very honest person, you're an honest colleague, you're an honest teacher, and you're very direct, and it's something I really like about you. And I think it's also very important to find that in what we do, because there's a lot to that. It's just important. It's important to have people around you that are going to be honest with love.
Yeah, I think, not to get too tangential, but I love this one book called The Four Agreements. And one of the agreements is essentially that like most of what people do has very little to do with what you are saying or doing. It has to do with them, right? So I think that I often have to think about that when I'm interacting with other people, when other people are interacting with me, is like they're coming at it from their perspective, and I can honor that and I can see that, and I have to come in with my perspective. So I think sometimes the reason I value the direct feedback and I want to give direct feedback is I just want to make sure that I have my agenda, the person I'm working with has their agenda, and that we are at least aligned about what those agendas are. And again, not to get too tangential, I just feel like sometimes in the industry, it can get polluted by people basically avoiding saying what they would like to have happen in a situation, either because they know that that's like maybe not the best benefit for the singer, but so the example I'll give is like, I would like you to sing this aria this way because the singer I actually wanted to hire for this gig sings it this way, right? But you can't say that in a room. You can't say, hey, soprano X, I'd really like you to do it like this. So sometimes that just clouds, I feel like, the work that's happening in the room because people are just not able to say the thing that they maybe should say or just get out in the open, which is, I have the expectation of this. You are not presenting that. Can we come up with something? And I feel like the only way we're ever going to come into a middle ground when it comes to art making is if everybody's just putting their cards out in just a genuine way, saying like, this is what I'm presenting. I'm hearing what you're presenting. Where can we meet in the middle? I think we just all have to be a little bit more truthful about where we're coming from in order for that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so do you feel too, like, I think what I'm hearing is that, so yeah, everyone comes to the table and has a different agenda because we all prepare individually, usually. But then to find a middle ground where you're agreeing on a common goal so that perhaps you can access something that's bigger. Is that the route that I think for you to access something bigger than ourselves, which is kind of what we're all trying to do, I think?
Absolutely. I mean, like, this is the thing, like, as a singer, you spend how many hours alone in a practice room and you're going, oh no, I'm not singing that dotted rhythm right again, or oh geez, what's that pitch? And you're not thinking about the fact that like in 5, 6, 7 weeks, you're going to be interacting with another person. They're going to have their own voice, that the color and the tone of their voice is going to affect the way that you sing it. But then you also, something that I think we often forget as singers is like, I'm not the one who's going to see this production or hear this concert version in its entirety. And so when I'm working with conductors or directors, if something doesn't align with what I thought it was going to be, I think we just all have to be open to having a conversation, because at the end of the day, right, it's about the storytelling, and you as a conductor and a coach have a much broader perspective, I'm going to guess, than me, who's just learning my specific role. And the same case, I have this sort of maybe deeper connection to it because I've been spending 2-3 months working on it. So I think there's room. What I'm trying to say is exactly your point. There is room for everybody at the table, because the end goal is that we want to get this bigger picture out to everyone through the sharing of our different ideas.
Yeah. And to, like you mentioned before, that makes me think about authenticity, the notion of authenticity, because it's really hard to know what you want to bring to the table that really resonates with you if you don't know your own authentic self.
Yes.
And that is a real challenge in a lot of businesses, I imagine, but in this business, which is my lens and the focus of this interview, learning all the rules, quote unquote, of classical, and just thinking that it's about that. Like if I can just do the rules good enough, then I'll just be able to come to the table and then do what makes me feel good and connect with people that way. But it's kind of like, there's a lot of, I don't want to say bypassing, but a lot of disconnect, I think, in doing it that way. But I totally understand why it gets like that way as well. I could do a whole 7 or 8 podcasts. And, it is really about the notion of collaboration, too, what you're talking about.
Yes.
True collaboration.
Yes.
Which we are discovering in the opera business, more how to do that, collaborate authentically.
Yes.
That gives everyone agency.
Yes.
And empowers everybody and doesn't disempower anybody, including the conductor, including whoever,
Yes.
including the lead role, including the other supporting roles, all of the people, including the pianist.
Yes.
So that really all feel like they're contributing, because really in reality, we all are contributing equally to this world.
Yes. I have to say, I think you were exactly right on the head, which is there used to be such a hierarchical, the conductor is the person and they know all of the things and everyone else must do it this way. And the director is the person and they know, or the coach or the teacher. And the bottom line is we are slowly discovering, I think, especially even the generation a decade behind me, it's interesting to see the way they show up in rehearsal rooms, is there is enough room for everyone to have their idea. And it doesn't mean that at the end of the day, you as the conductor are going to be less of the conductor, right? And I think that's been an interesting shift in the industry. And I think it's also changed the way that the singers show up, because a lot of it used to be, I will show up sort of like you were saying, I will do the things to get ready, and then someone else will tell me how to shape it musically or how to shape it in terms of the character. And now that we are all showing up in that space where we're hopefully trying to get to a more equitable conversation where everybody's voice has a little more weight, well, of course, then the expectation is as the singer that you are showing up with some ideas or showing up with some thoughts on how to present that music, if you want to have an equal footing at the table and an equal voice in the conversation.
Yes. So related to this, what might you say to someone, related to the notion of authenticity and having agency, I think we're in a time, let me just backpedal for a second. So I think we're in a time in the opera business of transition, both along the lines of what we've been talking about, but also repertoire-wise, and exploring what we want to keep and what we want to discard and how to move forward along those lines. So along with that, there are a lot of people that are coming into a place where they feel that they do not fit into one box. And you practice this in your educational work too. You speak about teaching from a classical lens, but also in a commercial contemporary lens. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
Commercial contemporary. And are interested in that work. And I am also interested in fusion projects, like opera fusion. I do a lot of that work myself. And so it's a zone I'm really lit up by as well. So what might you say to someone right now who is struggling to find a place in the vocal theater world that feels authentic to them if they do not fit easily or do not want to fit easily into the specific boxes, of which there are many, and categories that exist right now?
Yeah. I think this thing I would just say, and it has taken me too many decades of my life to realize this, is if it feels right in that it aligns with what you want to say artistically, follow that. So I feel like so much of the industry, and again, this is changing for a multitude of reasons, but so much of the industry has in the past been prescriptive. You must do A, you must do B, you must do C, then you will be a full-time performer. And I think what we're finding now, I don't use it as a platform, but like TikTok, for instance, or Instagram, I think what we're finding on those platforms is people are finding ways to share what feels aligned with who they are. And so I think one is like, if it feels right, follow it. And I think two is, if there is not a space for you, what a great opportunity to create that space. And so what I mean by that, I'll think about like a project you and I recently did at Opera America, Generación Perdida by Jorge Sosa. That project really spoke to me because I was not seeing other pieces that have the unique voice that I believe Jorge has. And so I could sit around and wait and hope that like someone writes this thing and asks me to do it, and maybe I'll get to, or I can say, you know what, let me figure out how to produce some of this on my own. Let me figure out how to find these collaborators. And not to, again, get too tangential, but with that particular project, you had introduced me to that piece. And I really am a firm believer that if you are investing in the things that are meaningful to you and align with you artistically, a lot of these things will find you as well. I think you really have to like put out your energies into what you want to come your way, instead of hitting your head against the wall going, I wish this were a different way for me to be. I'm not saying that's always going to be lucrative. I want to be honest with people about that. And I would say that that's been true since the beginning of time, of people who want to pursue the creative arts. But I do really feel that if you are putting your energies into the things that align with you, that things will come your way. If you are open and prepared, I think that's a really big one. Open and prepared to pursuing things that are not maybe the traditional paths that have been described through school. I say that as an assistant professor. It's like we are often taught it goes this way in school, and that's just not really the truth. Many people have many career paths that they're loving and feel very successful in that do not check the traditional boxes.
That makes me think of something else I wanted to ask you about, and that was your use of systems. In a lot of different ways, I have noticed that you seem to be I really appreciate how much clarity you have, and within your teaching, in your goal setting, in your shaping of your career, and in just the way you're talking about alignment, and how, just as you spoke of, there's not one right answer. And so that's a system that we're working in academia, especially, and yet you also speak about the freedom. So there's two different kind of things at play, and I'm wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit about the use of systems in your career, and why that's important to you, and how that helps you find the alignment.
Sure. I would say, I'm thinking about this word systems a lot. I come to this word for myself of like, for me, systems equal grounding. Like I struggle a lot. I think a lot of us do. I struggle with feeling that I'm not bringing the best of something to the table, adequacy, right? Like feeling inadequate. I think a lot of us have this, right? Imposter syndrome, or feeling anxious about something. And I think early on in my younger years, I think I used that to think, well, this is a good feeling that you feel inadequate because it means you will work harder at doing the thing. And what I found is then by the time I got to the rehearsal room, I just wasn't present, because I was constantly consumed by, am I playing the game, as we're talking about, right? Like the systems. Are you doing those systems? And for me, it shifted at some point where it's like, I just want to show up fully present and joyful. And what do I need to do that? So like a couple things for me are like, if it is a project that has a deadline of like, we're going to go up May 10 for this particular thing, I have to, within myself, go, okay, Vicki, that means 2 months ahead or 3 months ahead, you got to purchase the score and start learning the music, at least, right? And then, 3 weeks before, you have to have it memorized, which means you have to have X amount of coachings in ahead of time. I jokingly say this to my students, like, these things are not happening to you. They should not feel like they are happening to you. And so for me, scheduling it as a priority far in advance is a really big system that I really believe in, because something that I often say to myself is, you cannot wait to be motivated. Motivation is a feeling. You have to be disciplined, and discipline is a habitual practice of doing something. So like if I woke up and decided, do I feel motivated to practice? Probably not. Like I have, as you know, I have 2 small children. I've got a full-time job. Going, yeah, I'm really dying to crash in on those rhythms today is not something I'm waking up and thinking about. Some days you're like, yeah, I'm going to get it. I'm going to practice. I'm feeling amazing about this. And then some days you just have to say, like, I am carving out 30 to 45 minutes, or I'm carving out 3 hours this week where I am going to sit down, translate my music, read through the libretto, watch a couple video versions of something if that's, a thing that you like to do. But scheduling that time, I think, is really important. So treating yourself like the professional that you are or aspire to be, I think, is a big one. Like, make appointments with yourself to do the thing is really big. So that's, I would say, how I do a lot of my goal setting is like kind of dates and working backwards. I think the other thing that I would say is, like, I've just started to very recently reevaluate how I'm learning music. I'm doing a lot more metronome work these days. I'm doing a lot more speaking of the text over singing these days. And maybe if I were in my 20s, I wouldn't be as married to that because I'd still be all about the voice. But I think I'm at a place now where I'm like, this actually, again, grounds me, makes me feel centered, and going, like, I can do this text at 3 different tempi like an instrumentalist would. And it just helps me feel a lot more secure in that when it comes to the musical preparation. I am not one to practice, there are some people who they just crack open the score and they start singing it. I like to be a little bit more thoughtful about how I'm going to do that. So what I mean by that is, if it's vocally really challenging, I'm probably going to do it on some sort of straw phonation, if that's a thing you do, or oo or o or ah or whatever, single vowel work, that's what I'm trying to say. If it's not that vocally challenging, I'm probably going to try it at the text at a substantially slower tempo. I think the point I'm trying to say is, I really like to scaffold when I practice, and I wish someone had told me that in my 20s, as opposed to what many of us are kind of taught, which is like, hey, learn this by next week. And then you're sort of like, well, I think I'll guess on how to do that and hope that it's right. So I think one of the reasons I have the systems in place is it just allows me to feel like I can calm my own energies and show up in a way that's about the thing that I want it to be about, which is the music making. I was thinking about this video I saw of Yo-Yo Ma a few weeks ago, where he said something to the extent of, like, he tries to get all the music learning, if you will, the notes, the rhythms, the type of thing, done as efficiently as he can towards the beginning so that we can get to the music making. Right. And I think that sometimes as singers, we're so, like, resistant to that. It's like you have to do the things to set yourself up right so you can get to the music making part of it, right, not the what beat should I come in part of it. So I think that's why I'm so married to having systems, is I just don't want to be thinking about that in the room. I think by the time you get in the room, since this is a podcast about, preparation and how that, by the time you get in the room, that should not be in the forefront of your mind. That should be in the back burner. It's not to say you won't make mistakes. We all do. We're human. But by the time you get in the room, you should be ready to be flexible and make different musical choices.
And that makes me feel like because we're all looking for freedom in what we do, freedom and expansion. And I love the way that you put that, because if you are focused on, if you're immersed still in the systems, that is not the freedom zone. That's the systems zone.
Yes.
And that's not the point. It is assumed in what we do that the systems are already in place so that you can be free. That's the only way.
Yes. There's a really great book called Peak. I'm about halfway through it. And he talks a lot about that. It's about practicing, like how to learn a new thing, musical instrument, a sport, whatever. And he talks a lot about this, the way your brain moves information is the new information tends to, I might be misquoting this, so, don't take my word for it, people listening, but the front of your brain is taking the new information and thinking about that new information. And then you've got all this like information in the back that's been there, like you don't have to think about how you walk. It's already just in the back, you know how to do it. And so what we're ideally doing with practice is you're trying to move that, like, what's the note, what's the rhythm, what's the tempo. You're trying to move that stuff to the back room so that when the conductor says, oh, well, there's this really interesting thing that's going to happen in the orchestral part here. You have a decrescendo. Could you try to think about that in terms of the way that the harmonies are also moving because this is what the character is feeling? I can process that information. I got room in the front to take that information in. But I can't have that room if I'm going, I don't even know what beat I'm coming in on. And I think that as singers, there's like a really odd shame piece that if you don't do that fast enough, that you're somehow bad. When really, for me, my systems have just allowed me to go, I don't know if I do this long, if it takes me longer. I actually have no idea if I'm like learning music faster than other people. I have no clue, but I know how long I need. And that's all that matters. I mean, you as the conductor do not care if it has taken me 6 weeks or 6 months, as long as I'm showing up with the same level of presence and musicianship that you're expecting. I assume, right? You're not quizzing me on how fast I did it. And yet as singers, we do that a lot. It's like just another way for you to add on this shame spiraling that it just doesn't allow you to get to the heart of the thing that you're actually supposed to be doing, which is creating this music and not bringing your own insecurities or inadequacies into that space. I don't know. I feel like sometimes it clouds the room when people get in that headspace about it.
Yeah, and what it sounds like too that you're talking about, and something that I'm studying a lot right now, is the conscious mind versus the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is where our habits are. And so we want to make our practice our habit. And if it is still in the conscious mind, so all of that is not, because you even referred to it as kind of the back door, that's like the reptilian brain is the habit.
Yes.
If it is in the conscious mind, that's kind of where the ego sits, and the fear, like anything that's fear-based, as far as that, kind of that, it is cluttery.
Yes.
Because it's not in the habit yet.
Yes.
So there's no way for it not to be. So
Yes.
it's kind of like discovering for oneself how it feels to put it into the subconscious. So it is just a pattern then. You don't,
Yes.
like you said, you don't wake up and think about how your heart's going to beat all day long.
Right.
That's the subconscious.
Yes.
And so you can get to a place in anything that you do where it is part of that.
Yes. Yes, and I think to that point, then if you do mess up that rhythm, if you do come in incorrectly in that pitch, you are not going down that rabbit hole of like, I have to find 10 new ways to do that. You know the ways that you've been doing it. It's how you learned the rest of the piece. You're just having a moment for whatever reason. And that's, I feel like what the importance of those systems is really to get it in that back part of the brain and just, you trust yourself. You get a new relationship of trusting yourself that I think just allows me, I should say, to be calmer and to be, again, I just keep using the word present because I think I have just seen a lot of rehearsals where singers are not present because they're thinking about all the ways with which they are not showing up, or they're thinking about the dynamics in the room. And sometimes it just really, it really clouds, I think, a person's ability to show what they can bring, what they're able to bring to the process. And
I wager to say maybe any kind of thinking, as you say, takes us out of the present in general.
Yeah.
So it's, again, that can be kind of confounding in the classical music world because there are so many things to learn and prepare. So that can seem like the point, is that somehow this person up there who is a career singer has somehow magically been able to like put everything in this bucket and is constantly at the forefront of their mind and use these tools magically, but it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think about some of the people you see at the Met who have been singing the roles that they've been singing 10, 15, 20 times. And if it was just about getting all the rules right, I just don't think those people would sing those roles 10, 15 times. You know, once you've done it twice, it's sort of like, nailed it, I've got it. But there is something that has to be happening for people at that level where you do feel like it is a worthwhile investment to keep doing it on repeat. And so I think it can't just be about, to your point, it can't just be about getting it right, whatever that means. I put in quotes.
Right. And putting it into that backdoor space also makes it okay to make mistakes and it not fall completely apart.
Yes.
That's how that works.
Yes.
Because it's not about that at all. It's not about all those things that you've assembled and are just kind of putting together like a puzzle and working from.
Yes.
So it's something I never thought about, actually. I want to shift gears to a question that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and it also relates to the transitions of the opera world. So artists have a deep emotional connection to their work. And in light of this, how do the business side of entrepreneurship, another system, and creating emotional connection intersect for you? And I'll give an example. For example, I'm thinking of some work situations that aim to foster and use language to reinforce a family environment among coworkers. And yet, I've heard other people say they feel really comfortable in a less personal job situation. What is your preference along these lines, and how does it help your process? What are your thoughts about this?
My personal thought is boundaries are good in all relationships. So sometimes I get leery when I am in a workplace that is like, we are like a family. Well, I know many dysfunctional families, and I feel like sometimes, I'm not saying this is always, sometimes saying it is a familiar work relationship allows the boundary lines to get a little bit blurred. And, my own personal philosophy is boundaries are good in all things, including families. But I think that's really what it comes down to for me, is that I just want to be clear about what the space is that I am working in. And everyone has a different, when you say personal, and I know exactly what you mean because I've been in those environments. When you say personal or familial, it to me, it just gets a little bit like, are we doing that for the safety and security of everyone? Or are we doing that for the safety and security of a few people to feel like they can say and do what they would like to do? And I just find that people often think boundaries as walls, when really I think boundaries are like, this is how big the container is to do this thing. Isn't that great? Look at all the space you have. And, some people have a harder time with that than others. So I think for me, the clearer the roles, the boundaries are and the roles are, the better. It allows me to, again, feel like, oh, I can show up 110% in this way, in this space. That if I'm now thinking about how I'm going to show up, you can't see me, but I'm gesticulating a lot. If I have to think about how I'm showing up in a space of like, now I want you to be my best friend for life, even though I might not see you in 3 weeks, because this is often how the opera industry works. It's a lot to me for my brain space and heart space to manage when I'm also trying to be in a scene with someone and be someone else or think about manifesting that person's feelings. I mean, to some degree, I don't do this method of acting, but it makes total sense to me why some people are method actors, of like, I want to get into this particular headspace because this is the thing that I'm going to be doing. You don't see that a lot in opera typically, but I just feel like the safer we can make the space for everyone to know what is expected of them and how they need to show up, the better. And I think we can have a warm environment. I think we can have an inclusive and equitable environment without necessarily saying, we're best friends, or of course this happens. I mean, obviously, some of my, case in point, you and I, are, some of my closest friends are people I've met. At this point, I'd say most of my closest friends are people I've met through the industry. Of course, you're gonna make those connections. But I think going into the workplace with that as an expectation just puts a lot on people. I also just think about from a social perspective, and I've seen this a lot, for singers especially, where there's a pressure to be that person, to light up in the room and like be the social person. And, I forget what the term is, but I'm an extroverted introvert. So at work, I'm extroverted, and in my personal life, I'm introverted. That's very draining to have to not only be extroverted in the work part, but now be extra extroverted so that you think that we're also going to be like family members. I think it's just a lot to ask of a person. And again, I always ask myself this question: who is that for? Who is that for in that space? Is it to make a certain person in the casting room happy? Is it to build up a persona that you would like to have? I don't know. It depends on the person. But for me, it's just exhausting. I just want to do the work part. And I don't mean that in like a get back to work. I mean, like, I want to do the creative, fun, imaginative, deep work. And I can't be thinking about, is this conductor really like me, or do they just like me in this? It's just too many things, I think, for my emotional bandwidth.
Yeah. I read in a book that I read recently that said, if you can get fired, it's not family.
Yes.
And I've thought about that, and I think it's in the spaces that I've heard that I think I've always heard it intended. The intention is good. Like, they want to extend. They want people to feel like it's a welcoming, like you say, safe space.
Yes.
Which is a whole different conversation as well. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But it's also used a lot, and of course, not just in the arts, but in other situations. And I appreciate what you say about that. And I think it's important to think about that as we transition to having a more equitable system, but also, what is this? If that is something that doesn't make the space feel welcoming and safe, the pressure of the family or
yes.
whatever that is, then it's something to really keep in mind. So like,
yes.
And some people really do like that, though. They like that feeling of community. So how can we find community? And we're not here to answer that question, but like finding community and cohesiveness and openness and artistic exploration and feeling united as a group. I mean, in the situations that I've been in, it's kind of just happened spontaneously where it has felt like family, and that just happens.
Yes.
It's not been something that's been put on at the beginning.
Yes.
And that's a rare, I can count on one hand maybe the times
yes.
that I felt like that. And that's not a diss to the things that didn't feel like that.
Yes.
It just is.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that something that comes up a lot, and this has come up in my career actually, is that I don't think you have to trade one thing for another thing. I don't think you have to like trade being professional for also being a warm person. Just like I don't think we have to like to your point, it's like you can't get fired by your family members. You can get fired from a job. It's like you can also create a warm, nurturing environment that has, I use the word boundaries, you could, whatever, systems or regulate, whatever you want to use to say like, and can have a certain way that it has to go procedurally. I think there is room for both of those things. And I think that's where our industry is shifting a little bit. And then I think for a while it was like, well, if you are too, quote, professional, then you are an unwarm person, or you are not a friendly person because you're not getting drinks with everyone after the show, or you're not doing, and I just don't think that's fair to put on people, especially, and again, just I'm saying this from my own perspective, but especially as somebody who has a family and has small kids, like I want to be able to separate a little bit of my life in that way. And that's just, again, it just allows me to show up in the best version of myself in those situations. And I think that sometimes singers feel like they have to give up some of the best parts of themselves to get a job. I just don't think that's fair. I think there's room for all of it. Warmth and professionalism.
Yeah. And I think the notion, and maybe this is not a popular opinion maybe right now, but I do feel that it's on the individual to create a safe space for themselves. Not on something outside. Because if it is based on the external, it's never going to happen.
Sure.
If you don't feel safe in yourself. And again, I know that may be controversial, and that's dropping a loaded word right now, a safe space. And I desire everyone to feel welcome and safe.
Yes.
But I do feel like the onus is on me.
Sure.
The safest space because I say it is for me.
Yeah, I think to that point, what I'm hearing is sort of like, I should not feel like I have to sacrifice what feels like safety or, I think I immediately think of intimacy direction. And I have been in rooms where this has happened where, I see singers agreeing to things that I don't think they want to agree to, but they want to come across as a team player. And I think to your point, it's like really where the shift is happening is now people are starting to say like, we can talk about this. It's okay to say, no, actually that makes me feel a certain way. And I would like to just come up. Again, we were talking about this at the beginning with the ideas. It's like, it's not a stopgap. No, it's a way of saying like, can we pivot? Can we just pivot to a different idea that allows me to feel safe and comfortable and allows to get the message to get conveyed?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have just a few wrap-up questions, kind of maybe a rapid-fire, quick answer questions before we wrap up here today. And the first one I have is, if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self advice, what would it be?
Learn your damn languages. That would be it. Learn your languages. That is a lifetime relationship that if you want to be an opera singer, I guess I should say, is like you are never going to express the way you want to if you don't have that intimacy with the language. I just really believe that. I've been given that advice forever. So I'm always working on my languages because I'm like, it's just got to be one of those things. And the other thing I was going to say is like, it's not on fire is a thing I often will tell myself. It's not on fire. You're fine. It's going to be fine. You have time. Take a beat, get yourself in the right spot.
Yeah. What is one thing in growing your career that you didn't expect? Or also just personally on your personal journey that you didn't expect that has really played a big role in your life?
That you can make your own opportunities, and that doesn't lessen the artistic value of those opportunities, that you have something important to say, even if you feel it's been said before. I think these are things that I'm still constantly reminding myself of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's just that you don't, the room for you to grow artistically is only as small or as narrow as you allow it to be. And therefore, it can also be as expansive as you want it to be. And you actually have the ability to control that.
Yes. You're the only one that can control that.
Yes.
Not any job offers, not any company,
yes.
Not anything. Yeah. If you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
Oh, boy.
It's a big one.
I'd like to think, I guess I'm going to come back to like, I'd like people to feel I was an honest person. And always led with what feels like my genuine self most of the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. And this is the last question. Is there anything you wish I would have asked you today? Or anything else you'd like to say?
No, but I just want to repeat that motivation is garbage and you have to have self-discipline. No, I really do. I really can't emphasize enough that like, waiting till you feel like it, you might be waiting a long time. So put yourself in the right place. Get yourself the things that you need to be successful. It will be okay. it will all work out as it's supposed to. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much
it.
for taking the time to have this really exciting conversation. It's so nice to have you. Looking forward to the reading. Again, Victoria Vargas is our guest reading partner for our upcoming reading of Florencia en el Amazonas by Daniel Catan, Friday, May 10th at 7 o'clock p.m. at the Minnesota Opera Center in Minneapolis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.